Mid-concert, Ace Frehley cut his guitar's sound, walked to the edge of the stage, and without any explanation, began to wait. The arena was 15,000 people strong. Detroit. July 1977. Kiss in the middle of their Love Gun tour. The lights were blazing. The pyrotechnics had just finished. Gene Simmons was prowling stage left, tongue out, blood dripping from his mouth. Paul Stanley was working the crowd on the right, his star eye catching every spotlight. Peter Criss sat behind his elevated drum kit, sticks moving in perfect time. And Ace Frehley, the Spaceman, silver costume gleaming, Les Paul strapped across his chest, had just stopped playing. Not a dramatic stop. Not a rock star pose. He simply turned down his volume knob until the guitar went silent, let his hands drop to his sides, and walked slowly to stage right, away from his bandmates, away from the crowd's sight line. He stood there, completely still, facing the darkness backstage. The band kept playing. They had to. You don't stop a Kiss show mid-song. Gene hit his bass line. Paul covered Ace's guitar part vocally. Peter drove the rhythm forward. But something was wrong. The audience could feel it. 15,000 people suddenly uncertain, the energy shifting from celebration to confusion. Ace didn't move. Didn't look back. Didn't acknowledge the crowd or the cameras or his bandmates, frantically trying to figure out what was happening. He just waited. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what was happening on that stage, you need to understand what had happened 6 hours earlier. The band had arrived at Cobo Arena that afternoon for soundcheck. Standard procedure for a Kiss show, elaborate, technical, precise. Every explosion timed. Every light cue programmed. Every guitar tone dialed in exactly right. Ace walked into the venue carrying his guitar case and a small equipment bag. No entourage. No assistants. He preferred it that way. The Spaceman character was flamboyant, otherworldly, but Ace Frehley himself was quiet, focused, internal. He set up his rig on stage, his Marshall stacks, his pedal board, his Les Paul. He plugged in and started checking his sound. The guitar tech, a kid named Marcus who'd been with the tour for 3 months, stood nearby with a tuner and spare cables. That's when the arena's head sound engineer approached. His name was Ron something. Ace didn't catch it and didn't care. Ron had worked at Cobo for 15 years. He'd seen every major act that came through Detroit. And he had opinions. "Hey, Spaceman," Ron called out, his tone carrying that specific kind of casual disrespect that comes from people who think costumes mean you're not a real musician. "You gonna need all those effects tonight? Or you planning to actually play?" Ace looked up from his pedal board. Said nothing. Ron continued, emboldened by the silence. "I'm just saying, I've worked with real guitarists. Clapton was here last month. Now that's playing. Not all this." He gestured vaguely at Ace's setup. "Smoke and mirrors." Marcus, the guitar tech, tensed. He'd seen this before. People who looked at the makeup and the rockets and the fire, and assumed there was nothing underneath. People who confused spectacle with substance. Ace still said nothing. He adjusted a knob on his delay pedal. Checked his tuning. His face, painted silver and black in the Spaceman design, was completely neutral. "You deaf under all that makeup?" Ron pressed. "I'm trying to help you out here. Strip away the gimmicks. What do you actually have?" Ace straightened up slowly. He looked at Ron for a long moment. Then he reached down and unplugged every single pedal from his signal chain. Delay. Chorus. Distortion. All of it. He ran a straight cable from his guitar to his amp. "You want to hear what I actually have?" Ace asked quietly. His voice was calm, flat, without challenge or anger. "Sure," Ron said, smirking. "Show me what the Spaceman's got without the spaceship." Ace played. No effects. No processing. Just a Les Paul through a Marshall, clean and raw. He played for maybe 90 seconds. A melody that started simple and built into something complex. Jazz-influenced runs, blues bends, technical passages that required absolute precision, all woven together into something that sounded effortless but was anything but. When he stopped, the arena was quiet. The few crew members who'd been working had stopped to listen. Marcus was staring. Even Ron had lost his smirk. "That's what I actually have," Ace said, plugging his pedals back in. "The effects are for the show. The playing is for me." Ron mumbled something that might have been an apology, and walked away. Marcus approached carefully. "Ace, that was incredible. Why don't you play like that during the show? Why all the effects then?" Ace looked at him. "Because people came to see the Spaceman. I give them what they came for. But I know what's underneath. That's enough. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together." 6 hours later, mid-concert, something happened that hadn't happened before. Kiss was 3 songs into their set. The crowd was electric. Everything was going according to plan. And then, during Shock Me, Ace's showcase song, the one where he sang lead and took the extended guitar solo, the sound started cutting out. Not completely. Just small dropouts. A half-second of silence here. A crackle there. Barely noticeable to the audience over the drums and bass and screaming crowd, but devastating to anyone wearing in-ear monitors. Ace kept playing, compensating, adjusting his technique to work around the failing signal. But it was getting worse. Technical gremlins. The nightmare of every live performer. Could be a bad cable. Could be a failing amp. Could be the sound engineer running the board making corrections. Paul Stanley glanced over, concerned. Gene kept playing but his eyes were on Ace. Peter couldn't see from behind his kit but he could hear something was wrong. The guitar cut out completely for 3 full seconds. That's when Ace made his decision. He reached down mid-song and turned his volume to 0. Unplugged his wireless transmitter. Walked to the edge of the stage, to the darkness beyond the lights, and stood there. Waiting. The band kept the song alive. Barely. Paul was singing but watching Ace. Gene played louder to fill the sonic gap. The crowd was confused, their energy shifting from ecstatic to uncertain. Ace didn't explain. Didn't gesture. Didn't communicate with anyone. He just stood in that darkness, guitar silent, body still, while 15,000 people tried to understand what was happening. Backstage, the tour manager was screaming into his headset. The sound crew was in chaos. Ron, the arena engineer, was at the mixing board frantically checking levels, his face pale. 30 seconds passed. Felt like 30 minutes. Then Ace did something no one expected. He walked back to his rig, unplugged every single effect pedal, just like he had during soundcheck, and ran a straight cable from his guitar to the amp. No wireless. No effects. No tricks. He turned around, faced the crowd, and started playing Shock Me, again from the guitar solo. Pure. Raw. Direct. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. The tone was different now. Stripped bare. No delay to smooth the edges. No chorus to thicken the sound. Just a Les Paul through a Marshall, the way it had been played for decades before anyone invented effects pedals. And it was devastating. Ace's fingers moved across the fretboard with surgical precision. Every note clear. Every bend intentional. Every phrase musical and emotional and technically perfect. The solo he'd written for Shock Me had always been good, but buried under effects and production, people assumed it was tricks and technology. This was proof it wasn't. The crowd's confusion turned to awe. They could hear the difference. They could feel it. This wasn't showmanship. This was mastery. Paul Stanley stopped singing for a moment, just listening, a smile spreading across his face. Gene nodded in time, his bass locking perfectly with what Ace was doing. Peter hit his drums harder, feeding off the energy. And backstage, Ron stood at the mixing board with his hands frozen over the faders, understanding exactly what message was being sent. The solo built and built. Ace wasn't grandstanding. He wasn't showing off. He was simply playing, the way he'd always played when no one was watching, when there were no costumes or rockets or cameras. Just a man and a guitar and the music that lived inside him. When he hit the final note and let it ring out, the arena erupted. Not the programmed cheers they'd been giving all night. Something different. Recognition. Respect. Ace calmly plugged his effects back in. Walked back to his position. Nodded to Paul. The show continued. What followed silenced everyone in the room. After the concert, in the backstage area, Ron approached Ace. The spaceman was sitting alone in a corner, still in his silver costume, makeup starting to smear from sweat, carefully wiping down his Les Paul with a cloth. Mr. Frehley, Ron started. First time he'd used Ace's actual name. I owe you an apology. What I said during soundcheck. Ace looked up. Waited. I was wrong, Ron said simply. I've been doing sound for 15 years. I thought I knew the difference between real musicians and, well, I was wrong. What you did out there tonight, when the sound cut out, that took guts. And skill. Real skill. Ace nodded once. Went back to cleaning his guitar. Can I ask you something? Ron said. Ace looked up again. Why didn't you just tell me this afternoon? When I was being an ass about the effects. You could have explained. Defended yourself. Instead you just showed me. Ace was quiet for a long moment. Then, talking doesn't prove anything. Playing does. He stood up, put his guitar in its case, and walked toward the dressing room. Stopped at the doorway and looked back. The makeup and the rockets, that's the show. That's what people buy tickets for. But the playing? That's mine. I don't need to defend it to anyone. I just need to be able to do it when it matters. He left Ron standing there. Marcus, the guitar tech, had been listening from nearby. He approached Ron carefully. For what it's worth, Ace does that sometimes. When someone questions him, he doesn't argue. He just waits for the moment when he can answer without words. How often does it happen? Ron asked. More than you'd think, Marcus said. People see the costume and assume there's nothing underneath. They see the theatrics and miss the technique. Ace learned a long time ago that defending yourself with words just makes people argue more. But showing them. He gestured toward the now empty stage. That ends the conversation. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Weeks later, back in New York, Ace was interviewed by a music magazine. The journalist asked about the Detroit show, about the moment when his sound cut out and he stripped everything back to basics. Were you making a statement? The journalist asked. Was it planned? Ace shrugged. My sound was cutting out. Effects can fail. Cables can fail. But if you can play, you can play. Doesn't matter what's in the signal chain. But you didn't have to unplug everything. You could have just switched cables. Could have. So why didn't you? Ace smiled slightly. Sometimes people need to hear the difference. The journalist pressed. Between what and what? Between what they think they're hearing and what's actually there. The article ran with a photo of Ace on stage, not in his spaceman makeup, but in the studio, wearing regular clothes, holding his Les Paul. The headline. The guitarist behind the spaceman. Ace never kept a copy. Didn't need to. The moment in Detroit had already done what it needed to do. Years later, after Kiss had broken up and reformed multiple times, after Ace had left and returned and left again, a bootleg recording of that Detroit show surfaced. Someone had been recording from the audience. The sound quality was terrible, muffled, distant, full of crowd noise. But you could hear it. That moment when the effects cut out and the guitar went pure. That solo, stripped bare, proving everything that needed to be proven. The bootleg became legendary among guitarists. Not Kiss fans. Guitarists. They'd pass it around, pointing to that exact moment. Listen. Right here. This is when he unplugs everything. Young players would hear it and understand something crucial. The costume doesn't make you less serious. The show doesn't make you less skilled. And silence, the choice to wait instead of explain, can say more than 1,000 interviews. Ron, the sound engineer from Cobo Arena, kept working concerts for another 20 years. But he never again assumed the makeup meant anything about the musician underneath. Marcus, the guitar tech, went on to work with dozens of famous guitarists. He told the Detroit story to every single one. "Ace taught me something that night," he'd say. "Real players don't defend themselves with words. They defend themselves with the next note." Ace Frehley never talked about that night in interviews. Never referenced it. Never used it to prove a point. He didn't need to. The people who were there remembered. The bootleg survived. And somewhere in Detroit, in a box of old equipment, there's still a straight guitar cable, no effects, no tricks, that proved everything that ever needed proving. Some nights, silence is the loudest statement you can make.